independent objective study. What I would suggest that be replaced with is, he suggested a work committee made up of BOP, city council, local industry, and other community representatives, that's what I said that day, be formed to secure a new consulting firm tasked with providing the pros and cons for local generation, and if desired, the pros and cons for each applicable type. The last item is on the same page, the second paragraph, and actually it's a comment more than a change, because Dave, it has to do with something that you said that was recorded in the minutes, or at least maybe you didn't say it, but it was recorded in the minutes. The general manager stated path 2 does not preclude another independent study. Then he went on, then the minutes go on. Grand Haven Energy Organization has been very clear in its desire to not include the BOP in their proposed process. That just absolutely is not true. And they have not said that. Now, if you want to change that, fine, but
I was just referring to the petition specifically says that it's an independent party. That's the petition that they presented, and we are not independent from ourselves. So I, assuming that an independent party means somebody other than the BOP, what you are suggesting is that the petition that they gave us is not for an independent party. And if it is not for an independent party, then I guess that's fine. And then put in whatever the petition actually says. But
somebody reading this, Dave, is going to, there will be people who interpret this as you're saying that the BOP is not, it's not the Grand Haven Energy Organization's desire to include the BOP in their process.
I'm not trying to say either whatever GHEO would tell me. I am just reading what their petition says, and their petition says that it was for an independent study. You were suggesting that we participate in the process. I don't even think they're going to move forward with it with an independent study. So I'm not exactly sure. I think the point's mute, but if you'd like to, I was just suggesting that what my understanding was of what they were requesting was for an independent study. You were suggesting that you wanted us to participate in that study. All I was doing was pointing out that that's not my understanding of what they were telling us. But I think the minutes are not the appropriate time to really talk about this. I think what I said is fine. That is what I said.
Right. And that's where you want it. It's up to you. But I'm telling you, that's the way it'll be interpreted. The people who read it. Fine. So is there any objections to the two changes I'm talking about here?
Hearing none? No objections. I think so. It would be helpful, John, if you would write it out so that they have that to get election help written down there.
Yeah, and I know, John, you're only here for one more meeting, but if you have these lengthy changes that you want to do for the minutes, it would be entirely appropriate just to give them to us a few days in advance, particularly before, and we'll incorporate them into the minutes. The draft minutes are all in your packet, so you don't have to spend all this time doing that. It's up. It's fine.
Any other comments on the?
I did want to just spend. There was a couple items that, if you did review the. Is it just I'm not close enough, or is everyone hearing this?
I don't hear you very well.
Okay, it's on, but I don't feel like it's projecting at all.
I don't think it is.
Okay. Is this any better?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. Just a couple items. Obviously, and it's in my general manager's report, so I don't want to belabor the situation, but when you look at the financial statements, there's a couple screwy things going on here. One of them is that we're only 2 months into the financial year. So anytime you're 2 months in, particularly timing issues of bills when they come in and that sort of thing get amplified, and they tend to work themselves out as we go forward. But in this particular month, I need to explain something that probably hasn't been explained before, and it has substantial impacts on the cost of the power that we purchased for the first 2 months. And if you look at the income statement, the point that I'm making here is that if you compare year over year net purchase power, this year's bill is almost $643,000 above last year's bill. So there was no question on that, but it amounted to a 24.3% increase. Now, I need to explain how that happens, because when you get these statements, what you're seeing is the actual bills that were received and paid for power in a given month. All right. Now we get weekly bills and monthly bills. So the monthly bills, no problem. We get them around the 17th, 18th of the month. We pay them, and they're included in the monthly report. We also get, for a significant portion of our real-time purchases, day ahead and real-time purchases, is weekly bills. So we get a weekly bill, and those weekly bills are delayed not very much, only I think it's 7 or 8 days. All right. So the close of the week, 8 days later, we get a bill, we pay it. And so those weekly bills for primarily the short-term market stuff. And then we also bill the bilaterals that we have on that every week. What happened this year, and what happens in most months, we have 4 weeks, right? A couple months out of the year, we have 5 weeks in a given month of monthly bill or weekly bills. What happened this year is that 5-week period was in August. So we had 4 weekly bills in July and 5 monthly bills or weekly bills in the month of August. I don't want to belabor this point, but last year we had 4 in July, 4 in August, and we have 5 in September, right? So you're not looking at the same number of weeks billed year over year in this analysis for the net power purchase expenses, and it will correct itself when the next month, when there's 5 weekly bills in July or in September, and there's only 4 this year. That will equate to 13 in the 3-month period for both years, and then that year over year will become a lot closer. Does that make sense? I don't want to leave the impression that if you have reviewed this, that our power supply costs are up. We are experiencing, and it's something that I wanted to report to you as well. We're seeing some pretty substantial increases in power supply costs on the short-term market year over year. All right. So, I mean, you're talking 8 to 10% for that portion of our billing. So those are going to become noticeable as we progress into this year, that particularly in the summer months when we experience some pretty substantial bills in August. But it's not that bad. All right. So I just wanted to, not have people look at 24% and go, they're up 24%. They're up. Some of that is due to this timing, and some of it is due to that our bills are actually up. That makes sense?
Okay, any other comments on the agenda? All in favor of moving the agenda, consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That's one of those public comment.
I'm a little short here. I'm Bob Manutza on 945 Washington Avenue, here at Grand Haven. Forgive me if my comments are a little out of date, but I know there's still a hearing scheduled for next week on the air emissions permit request. City Council has been asked by some citizens to weigh in on the pending air emission permit for proposed natural gas fired generators.
Is that microphone working?
Yeah, I think it's just where I'm standing. Is this better? No? Yes? I think I just about have to be touching it. All right, let me start over. So, City Council has been asked by some citizens to weigh in on the pending air emission permit on proposed natural gas fired generators. In my opinion, this is not a matter properly before council for action. Council has no involvement in the operating permits of the BLP, and formal action by council would seem to be out of order. Individual members of council, however, may certainly have and express their individual opinions. Having said that, I would make the observation that council has formally rescinded the requirement that the BLP build generations replace the sewage plant. And the BLP has stated at the previous meeting that it was abandoning plans for a gas-fired peaking plant. The area emissions permit, if approved by Eagle, would not be applicable to any other installation of equipment or any other location, would therefore be useless. It would appear that allowing the permit process to continue to be an exercise of bureaucratic inertia and a waste of public commentary with no useful outcome. I don't see any value in this. In my opinion, permit application ought to be withdrawn. Further, I believe that withdrawing the permit and discontinuing the process would allow Eagle Air Quality Division to withdraw from its involvement on this site, which may simplify the remediation review process going forward. Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Jeffrey Miller. I live at 1120 South Harbor Drive. And Mayor Manetza sort of stole my thunder, but if I can, what I'd like to do is read to you the second page of a letter that I addressed to council on September 7th, modified slightly to apply to the Board of Light and Power. And to that effect, I'm aware of a letter from the Grand Haven Energy Organization that was mailed to BLP Chairman Smith 4 weeks ago, urging that the BLB to withdraw their pending air permit since the peaking power plant won't be built. I also confirmed 3 weeks ago in correspondence with Eagle that the exhaust from the boilers, which provide the heated water for the snowmelt system, are in fact exempt from needing their own permit. I was also told that only the BLP can withdraw their air permit application number 2021-054. Therefore, I would urge the Board of Light and Power to consider a separate resolution to withdraw their air permit application. This would help to bring the community together and save concerned citizens, possible remonstrators, and other parties the time, effort, and expense of committing to the public comment period of the application process now that the matter is moot. But there's still much to be considered and reviewed regarding Grand Haven's energy future. I am hopeful that the city can, in the near future, bring all pertinent stakeholders together to develop a plan to remediate Harbor Island to the regulators and citizens' satisfaction and address the circumstances surrounding the snowmelt system. I would also urge the topic of energy conservation be added to the mix of solutions on how Grand Haven's energy demands are addressed, along with sustainable approaches, local renewable generation, and how important projects like Beyond the Pier can incorporate its share of responsibilities in solutions that the entire city can get behind. I would also urge the Board of Light and Power Board of Directors to consider developing in the not too distant future a citizen advisory group that could meet on a quarterly basis with staff, for staff to use as a sounding board when staff is considering other initiatives that could affect the city in general or the environment at large. I was a member of the Citizen Advisory Committee for the Citizens Energy Group, which provided the drinking water and did the wastewater for the city of Indianapolis. The Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, the Friends of the White River, I represented Earth Day Indiana, and other groups met on a monthly basis with the staff to be a sounding board and also to be a conduit of information to our respective organizations as to what the city of Indianapolis is planning to do with regard to water treatment, conservation, and wastewater disposal. I think this kind of organization would suit the BLP very well in helping the staff understand the concerns of the environment and then also help generate constructive, positive feedback so that when the board of directors convenes, they will be assured that the community is supportive of staff's initiatives. Lastly, as some of you may know, I'm a snowbird, as is Chairman Smat. My house in Tucson, Arizona is serviced by the Tucson Electric Power, TEP. And that organization each year awards recognition and prizes to those in the not-for-profit, the government, and in the business sectors who have shown initiatives of their own or in concert with TEP to improve energy efficiency and reduce energy waste and consequently energy conservation. So I would like the Board of Light and Power to also consider the idea of perhaps having annual awards to recognize those individuals in those different categories who are trying to make a positive impact in reducing their demand for electricity and consequently helping the BLP in its mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jerry?
Jerry McKeela, 1235 Slayton. And I want to, John brought up the thing that was brought up at the last meeting about getting one more independent group and getting people together and doing more studies. And, there's proposals for more citizens group and more study and more, and it all sounds good, except that my question on these things is always, and who pays for hiring the experts? Who finds them, but basically who pays them, because there's no budget for any of these things. And I don't know if who's going to be on the hook if any of these studies are ever done or taken into account. So that's really the bottom line. It's easy to propose things, and finding out who's going to pay for it is a whole other story. And that's a big concern that I would have.
Thank you. Everyone wishes to speak.
Jim Hagan, 400 Lake. Recently, people have been talking about having to look at repurposing some of the sim site. And one of the things I'd like to put on the table early is to include the possibility of a small solar array on the island. This can be of a number of forms. It could either be a community solar garden, it could be a private, public project. We have a lot of support in this community from the Community Foundation. One of their tenets is support of alternate energy sources. We also have a lot of companies who are in need of purchasing RECs for renewable energy credits. If we had a public-private project, they'd be generating RECs that companies perhaps like Shape, who need to increase renewable content, as they've said, could purchase. The EPA has had a program for over 2 decades now called, let me make sure I get it right, it's Repowering America. I looked at the 2020 report on landfills and landfill barriers. They put in 690 megawatts of solar, and it's been 240 projects. So that's a significant amount. These landfills are capped, so they don't have foundations that penetrate the clay cap. So it's a proven technology. There's a number of companies that do it. There's samples out there on the web. You can look at how all the ballasts and the panel supports are put together. So I'd like to just make sure that the BLP and the city look at those possibilities. I think it's a real win-win. We know that cleanup of a site can take 25 or 30 years. That just happens to be about the life of an array. Electricity from array can be used for pumping, whether it's pump out or re-inject pumping. So I'd like to get that people thinking about it right now, because I think it's a really good possibility if we have to go and cap. Thank you.
Thank you. If there is no other comment, we'll move on to item 5.
Maybe I could just comment on the public comment for just a minute. It does the air emissions permit request that both Bob and the mayor and others have suggested. Do you want to put that on the agenda for consideration? I mean, if we don't do something at this meeting, obviously the point is moot, because we can talk about it and I can do whatever the board directs me to do in this regard. I think there's pros and cons to doing what's being said, but if we'd like to put it on the agenda to talk about it, if I wait till next meeting to put it on the agenda, it's probably that much longer. And actually the public comment period closes the end of this month anyway, I think it is. So whatever the board's will is, if it wants to put it on the agenda, or if it just doesn't want to act on it or doesn't want to consider talk about it, that's fine too. I guess that particular one. The other two, I actually agree with Jim on the solar garden. That is a good location, but I think we're probably a long ways out from that at this point in time. So I don't necessarily disagree, but I don't think there's any immediate action on that. And I appreciate your comment on the sustainability committee. And I think that's what both Jeff and others have suggested before. How most communities do that, and I'm sure it was in Indianapolis this way, is a sustainability committee such as that is actually, it's not necessarily a utility function. It's a city function, and they look at water issues, recycling issues, all that kind of stuff. The board would be happy to participate in that. I think we've said this before. I think Andrea Hendrick has brought it up as well. If the city wants to start that, I think the large customer suggested the same thing. I actually believe the appropriate spot for that committee is at City Hall. And the Board of Light and Power would be more than happy to dedicate staff to participate in that process. So, I mean, I think you're kind of going to the wrong spot, but we're happy to participate as a participant in the sustainability committee if the city wishes to develop a sustainability committee. But I don't think that's really an action for the board. It's a broader issue than just. And really, when you're talking about behind the meter stuff, like you're talking about, a lot of times that requires code enforcement, code changes that are really more appropriately in the building and grounds area or building official area than they are in the utility area. So I would add, I think both of them are good ideas. I would just encourage you to go in a different avenue. And if that's what council would like us to do, we're more than happy to participate in that process. I think we've had this discussion before. But on the air emissions permit stuff, I guess I need direction from the board if they would like to add that to the agenda or just not act on it and let it play out. It's up to you.
I think we could ask you to put it on next month's agenda. That way, there's any additional information. Very nothing for that.
I'm ready to move on, Mr. Chair, if you are, to the next item.
We're up to 5A.
Correct. All right, get in the general manager's report. Purchase orders, there's only one on the consent agenda, and that's for Kent Power to, they're the contractor, and we've been approving materials on this project already, but there's project that we have, that will start, in a few months or so, to convert some of the older 2400 volt system in Ferrisburg to the higher volt, our higher distribution voltage. So we did solicit proposals on that, and Kent Power was the winning bid at $199,035. So that's the only purchase order that's before you.
What's your pleasure, board?
I'll make a motion.
Second,
Any comments or questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
So has that work been completed or it's, okay, that's scheduled to be completed? And then will this take care of all of the 2400 north of the bridge? How about the 2400 on this side?
One more round. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Any opposed, same. Motion carries. Next item.
Okay, given the communication back and forth, might need to explain a little bit what's happening here. If everybody remembers, we got to the point of actually approving a bond resolution to go to the bond market and sell approximately about $45 million of bonds. The board approved that resolution and it went to city council, and that's when we rethought the project, canceled the project. And this action that you have today is not a revision of the bond resolution, right? So it's not a new bond resolution that replaces the one that you guys passed 2 months ago. What's before you tonight is a resolution to repost the project, renotice the project. So we're actually going back, not 2 months, we're going back 18 months into March, January, February, and March of last year when we noticed a $75 million project. Now, why are we going back that period? Why don't we just revise the bond resolution and go back to the public? Well, before you issue bonds, you have to provide a notice in a referendum period to the public so that they can review the bond amount and the project that it is, and have an opportunity to file for a referendum and call that to a vote of the people. Now, we don't anticipate that that's happening. When we filed the initial notice of intent, there was not a request to do that. But what we've done now is we are changing the project definition as it was approved in that notice of intent. And it's changed enough, the project has changed enough by your bond counsel's recommendation that you need to renotice a revised project, all right? So what we're doing in this resolution is not changing the bond resolution. We aren't to that point yet. That'll come later. What we're doing is we're approving a posting in the paper to suggest that we are revising that bonding that we posted 18 months ago to a lower amount from the maximum of 75 million to a maximum of 28 million. And we are changing the definition of the project to remove the controversial elements of the project. 3 things: the generation component, the office facilities on Harbor Island, and the snowmelt equipment. Those items are taken out of the project, and the definition of the project has been revised accordingly. We've also now added into the project some of the distribution-related improvements that were in the capital improvement plan that you approved. And there's some pretty substantial upgrades, changes to some of our substations at Ossipoff, North, and Sternberg, and that some of these circuit upgrades that we're talking about, just like this one that we are up here, we think we should have the flexibility to use some of those bond proceeds for those projects, particularly if we're able to reduce the amount that we need to spend on environmental remediation. All right, so the environmental remediation is still included as an element of the quote project, but we feel that including some of these other elements that we would otherwise use for cash allows us to use our bond proceeds for some of these other elements in our capital improvement plan and keep the cash that we have in the bank to utilize for potentially that environmental cleanup. And so in other words, what we're recommending doing is when we're changing this project definition, two things are occurring. One of them is we're taking out elements that we're no longer planning on doing. The other thing is that we're putting in some elements that it might make some sense to actually use bond proceeds to pay for these projects that we were doing and save the cash, particularly given the fact that we have to spend the bond proceeds in 3 years. All right. So if this environmental work that we have to do gets pushed out because of uncertainty and delays and retesting and testing, and the idea of finding this PFAS, those purchases or those elements of the project might get pushed out, and we want to spend these dollars that we bond as quickly as we possibly can. So we're putting other elements of our current capital improvement plan in the bond project at this point in time. So what you have before you tonight is a resolution approving a notice that changes the project definition. Now, this doesn't have to be so specific that says, geez, we want $2 million for this, $3 million for that, $8 million for that. This isn't of that nature at this point in time. We are way back at the notice period where we're saying we're going to bond. The maximum amount now is 28 million. Now, do we anticipate 28 million? No, we probably think that with the revisions that we're doing, we think the bond will likely be about 24 to 25 million, but we would like during this referendum period to look at it, verify the numbers. Construction costs on some of these projects that we're looking at doing in the next 5 years are going up. And we want to make sure that we're solidifying that number before we hit down on exactly 24 or 25 million. But if you take out use the $45 million that we were originally going to bond, and you take out the elements that we are no longer going to do, that would result in a $24 million bond issue. The problem is that we don't know some of these other projects at this point in time. We want to leave the flexibility at this point in time to bond a bit more if that's in our best interest to do that and leave the cash in the bank that we have. So I think the uncertainty associated with this environmental work that we're doing over the next 5+ years, potentially, it behooves everyone to keep the cash in the bank and use the bond proceeds for these elements of our capital improvement plan, 5-year capital improvement plan that are more known, timetable, given year, that sort of thing, that we can actually make sure that we spend this money in the 3-year window that we're allowed for from the bond date. Does that make sense? But at this point in time, all you're doing, you're not approving a new bond resolution. You're not approving a new amount. You're just approving this notice that's printed here on the exact notice that will be put in the paper is printed here in this resolution. And council then will have to approve this same resolution. I believe it's on your agenda for Monday. For that this same resolution go to council for their approval so that we can get the notice in the paper and get this 45-day period moving so that we can stay on schedule to issue bonds sometime either late this year or early in January.
Okay, we should begin by having a motion to discuss this.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Okay. Board's open for discussion.
I was just curious on, I didn't see any mention of new office space, versus, I mean, you're putting in a definition. I would suspect it would be okay to put that on there. Either you're going to purchase something, build something, renovate something. I was surprised not to see it in.
So here's why one of the other reasons why we put some better known projects in the amount and took out a bit of unknowns, because when you post the project, you need to know some specifics. If you remember when we talked about this last year, everybody said, well, where is the generation going to be located? What exactly type of generation it is? And if you remember our discussion last month, we're in the process of evaluating if there's some existing buildings that we could possibly utilize. We don't know at this point in time, exactly where that building might be located. And so what we did, and that was part of the process of saying, okay, well, we know a little bit more about these projects. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. We're going to bond $24 million, let's say, and we're going to use that $24 million to finance portions of our 5-year capital plan. All right. But we don't know. So some of the elements that we don't know exactly enough definition to put into this project, we just took out. All right. So our plan has changed a bit in the financing. That's why we actually took out those facilities and didn't put anything in its place, because we don't know enough at this time about what that office facility may look like to put it in here. But our intention would be is that we would by putting some other elements into the project, we can use the bond proceeds for those projects, and that will free up cash reserves for some of those other elements that, and the problem is there's quite a bit of difference. If we can get an existing building and utilize it and remodel it and move facilities around, that could be a substantial difference in price between that and building a new facility on a greenfield site. So at this point in time, we're looking at all of them. We didn't really want to wait to push this notice in the paper until all of that was decided. We have a discussion at the board level, and then we're pushing this thing out till November or December before we can even notice the project or notice the bond. And then we're waiting 45 days after that to bond. It really seemed a bit simpler to put other elements that are more known at this point in time into the bond. But the idea is that we're financing a portion of our 5-year capital plan with bonds, and we're financing the rest of the capital plan and large capital expenditures with cash. And the exact breakdown of what it goes where and what's used for what has really been overemphasized in the past, and we really shouldn't be using the bonding to determine whether or not we're approving a particular project at all or not. It's really the capital improvement plan that really we should be controlling the actual, what we want to do in the next 5 years. And then the bond amounts are tied to a portion of that capital plan. I understand what we're doing. That's why we're trying to do what we're doing, because we're trying to take the controversial stuff out of this particular item, or the more uncertain stuff, and put the more certain stuff into the plan so that we can move this bond project forward. Because at the end of the day, most of this particular bond amount is going to be used to reimburse the bands, right? So almost $12 million of that $24 or $25 million has already been spent. All right. So it's the other $12 million that we're talking about being defined here. And quite frankly, as soon as we bond, we want to expend that money on those portions of the capital plan to get them paid for. And then we can draw from our cash reserves for the rest. I know that's a long, does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense. I still personally would like to have seen it in the bond resolution as a definition to be able to, if needed be, use some of that bond money toward new office. I understand what you're saying, a way of offsetting the amount, but
I think
I was surprised.
I think we ran into this with the initial notice. We wanted to broaden the definition of generation. And I think John and Ryan Cummins at the council level were saying, geez, why don't we make this broad enough so that we can bond different types of generation on different sites. And what bond counsel said at that point in time is the same thing he's saying now is you can put in there, building and facilities, right? But when you put in building and facilities, like we put in substation improvements, they felt it important particularly given our last year of discussion, that people want to know where that is, what it is, what portion, how much you're going to spend on that sort of thing. And we really just aren't going to have those answers for at least 60 to 90 days. So I think at this point in time, we should go forward with what we know and put that into the project. And the board will still control the project, whether or not it's bond proceeds are being used or cash. But I think that was the thought process behind this. And I don't think we have enough really to put into a project definition at this point in time, just to say buildings and facilities that the board may choose to do. That's not something that the bond council said is adequate enough to answer the public's questions in this particular realm.
Other comments on it?
I'll comment, Jack. I think the public is going to be very curious as to how you arrived at 28 million. And I think we need an answer to that. Because, let me finish. On our first project, the first time we went through this, David, we had definition of how we, don't shake your head, we had a definition of $45 million on the progressive A&E report. They showed us line by line how much went into that $45 million. We knew approximately what it was intended to be. It didn't mean it was cast in stone, but we knew approximately where it's going to be. You're asking us to give the okay to tell the public that we want to now change what we're asking for down from 75 million down to 28 million, and we don't even know whether or not whether the term is going to be 20 years or 10 years. So we have no idea, for instance, in terms of cost, what's it going to cost us per month, per year, for the principal and for the interest? In fact, we know nothing. Now, you just gave us a piece of information today that hasn't been out there. You're saying we might spend 12 million of it on the bond anticipation notes. We might. See, we don't know what you're doing. This is the problem.
So
where did you get 28 million? Tell us where that came from, that number.
okay, we looked at the 5-year capital plan. And if you look at the current approved capital plan, there was about $85 million in the capital improvement plan for stuff that
Will you tell us which stuff you've included in the 28 million?
that's what I'm saying is it.
You don't know.
No, I didn't say that. I said a portion of that 85 million. Now, we just took $20 million approximately out of that 85 million. All right? Because we are no longer going to build generation. So that leaves, again, and I'm trying to do these numbers by memory. I provided you the 5-year capital plan this afternoon so that you could look at it.
It doesn't help to not know which items are in the 28
understand,
million.
but what I told you in the email this afternoon, that you're still, I don't think we're saying, the idea that we had at this point in time when we noticed a $45 million project is simply wrong. We did not. We had a $45 million project in the bond resolution when we went to council for actual approval of selling bonds. Last year, when we actually approved the notice of intent, we didn't have any of that. So it is absolutely incorrect to suggest that when we approved the notice of intent, that we had clearly defined amounts for exactly this, for that, and exactly breakdown of that 75 million, because at that time, we didn't have any of that. So what we have today is a lot more than what we had last January when we approved of the plan. So how did we get 28 million?
Yeah, I did.
$28 million is the upper end on what staff and financial advisors feel we think we could possibly use on that 5-year capital plan.
which items in the 5-year capital?
It doesn't, that's not what we looked at. We looked at what is the cash requirements and the bond requirements for the entire plan. And I think that's what you're suggesting is we don't have to, when we issue bonds, we don't have to tie, a bond to this. The reason we're bonding is because we have a capital plan that exceeds our cash levels that we can possibly do. So we have to borrow. Now, whether we borrow for item A or item B, you know what? I really don't care. It doesn't make, and it shouldn't really make any difference to the Board of Light and Power. If you're going to approve all of this stuff, and some of it is going to be funded with cash, and some of it is going to be funding with bonds, as long as we have enough from the bond proceeds and from the cash reserves to fund all of these items, why do you care whether this item is a bond? I mean, once those dollars get sold and they get put in the bank, you are not going to tell any difference between item A and item B. It's
Let
going
me
to,
get this right, Dave. You've got a capital plan. You're talking about the whole plan, not just part of it.
the entire plan plus,
You're talking about $65 million roughly
well, if
over
you,
the next 5 years. Is that right? And you're saying we're going to take that 20 million out for the generation of
Yeah,
power
we're gonna take-
and for the office building and the one.
no, I did not say that. I did not say, and if your email to me today is that's the problem with taking up, we are still saying that we're going to do something for office facilities. So I'm not suggesting we take that all
So
out.
how much are you suggesting we take out for things?
I don't know that yet. That's what I'm telling you. There's uncertainty associated with the facilities. So at this point in time, John, all we're doing is posting a maximum amount that we may bond. Now, I'm telling you that if I had to give you a number today that you're demanding that I absolutely need to know today what we're going to bond, I think that the number is going to be closer to 24 million.
I didn't say I absolutely had to know. I wanted to know what made up the 28 million.
So I can break down $24 million today, and I can tell you exactly what I think, the quote project will be paid, will cost. And at this point in time, I'm saying it's 24 million. I'm also telling you that there's a ton of uncertainty in our 5-year capital plan, particularly as it relates to the expensed amounts and the office facility. So what we've done is we said, okay, let's get this noticed. If the public is okay with up to 28 million, that's what's always done in these notices of intent is they put out there the maximum amount. They put out there what the amounts are going to be used for and the maximum term under which we're going to bond for. Now, if it comes in at 24 million, this is the discussion that we're having with our financial advisors at this point in time. If these amounts are verified at 24 million and we can do that, and this project comes out and we review this all, it's likely that your financial advisors are going to suggest a 10-year note. Now,
You don't have, if this is 65 million.
again, I don't want to use that number because
I do because you used it earlier.
And
If it's
that's what I'm
If
concerned.
it's 65 million, we take 20 million out. We're down to 45. Agree?
Yes.
Okay.
65 minus 20 is 45, yes.
We got 28 plus 28 in cash. That's 56, but we also have to have 13 million set aside, for reserve, correct? I don't see, here's the problem, Dave. The public is gonna wanna know, when you change the number down to 28 million, they're gonna wanna know what we're talking about. I mean, to say, well, it's part of it's the capital plan, what part of it? And for how much? I mean, I know, because of our previous conversations here at these meetings, I know that, we have this almost a little over $13 million in debt with Huntington Bank. I know that we demolished Sims. I know that we have the environmental remediation, but we have no idea how much at this point. I know that we have reconstructed a substation. I know we have AMI meters. I know that. And you gave us approximate numbers for those.
No, I I know exactly, and I've given it to you today, exactly what the band amount is. It's on your balance sheet. It's 13,
I've got that.
exactly.
It's 13,291,700.
Right, and that is all, and again, by removing,
That gonna be covered totally?
no, that's
How
what,
much of it? 12,
what,
10?
can I answer your question before you beat the crap out of me? Do we just stop it? I'm trying to answer your questions in a professional manner, but it's kind of hard when I'm getting interrogated, all right? So I am more than happy to answer your questions. And at some point in time, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask for you to call the question because this is not productive. All right? I'm sorry, but it's not.
You don't think it's productive that the public?
Absolutely not. Not the way you're treating me and my staff for the last 6 months, John.
Oh,
So
crying.
So here, I'm telling you that the bands will need to be repaid. Now, the next item on the agenda is a discussion about whether we can use bond proceeds to pay off a portion of what we use the bands for. Now, that's going to be another discussion. So no, all of the bands will not be repaid with bond proceeds. Some of that $13.2 million is going to have to be paid for with cash because the elements in that we thought would be bonded are no longer bonded. So yes, a portion of that is going to change as well. Now, all of these questions do not have to be answered before we notice the project. That's the point here. What we're doing is putting enough flexibility into the quote 28 million and into the term so that the financial advisors can come back, we can evaluate the numbers, they can look at the capital improvement plan, and they can come back to you before you and the council issue a bond resolution to actually sell debt that will be closer. I'm hoping that it won't be 28 million, but it might be. That's why it's the maximum amount. So I'm hoping that it will be closer to the 24. I am thinking that we'll probably cut the term from $45 million down to 10 years. And if you look at the actual annual debt service payments of a 10-year bond at 25 million versus a 20-year bond at 45 million, the annual debt service is almost exactly the same. So those are the types of things that we need to look at. We need to get your questions answered. But in the meantime, we're suggesting that you approve of a notice so that these questions that you're suggesting people are going to have, they can be answered. Public can come in, they can ask questions. They can say, how did you get at that number? We can talk about those numbers. But at this point in time, we did not have those answers a year ago. Maybe we should have had more answers a year ago and we wouldn't have gone through a year-long process of asking. But at this point in time, we know a lot more than we did last January. And the suggestion that we don't know anything is simply wrong.
I would like to just make a comment and then I'm going to ask for a vote. And my comment is what we are doing today has nothing to do with line by line items on specific projects. It's merely telling the people that in fact, in the future, we're going to come out and ask for their approval. So I think what we're discussing today is premature. I've been through a lot of bond issuing and hearings, and we've never had a discussion like we're having today because it's premature. I'm going to ask for a vote. We have a motion on the floor. I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Director Funk?
Yes.
Director Keith?
Yes.
Director Nasser?
No.
Director Witherall?
Yes.
Chairperson Singh?
Yes. Next item.
Okay, this has to do with the repayment of the bands. One of the questions that has come up, and obviously it's a question that both the board and the council are going to have to struggle with over the next several months, is what the board, since what the board can and cannot pay for, or may wish to or wish not to pay for, in the snow melt system. So just to refresh everyone's memory and to talk about this, we decided early on, and it was a commitment that was made, that the board would look at a combined heat and power plant that would produce heat for the snow melt system and electricity for the or for the electric utility. We progressed for 2.5 years in that regard. When we noticed the particular project, again, it was noticed as a combined heat and power plant, and the bonds were to be used not only for the electric generation equipment, but for the heat equipment associated with the snow melt system. And that was determined to be entirely appropriate as long as the combined heat and power plant was constructed. Similar to what we were talking about with Sims. If Sims is operated, it is an electrical function to produce heat from that plant. It makes all the sense in the world for the electric utility to participate in the snow melt system. Last year, when we started going down this path of contemplating not having a combined heat and power plant, we asked for an opinion from our legal counsel, city attorney, on what we can and can't do as a result of this consideration of not building the combined heat and power plant and having a quote standalone heat source. But we had already approved of buying equipment for the snow melt system that would eventually get moved into the combined heat and power plant. So now we are sitting in a situation where we issued bans for the project, and the project was defined as the bond project, including snow melt. Now, as you just approved a resolution without that snow melt equipment in it. So that means that the bans that were used to finance the snow melt equipment, and it's about $1 million, that dedicated equipment that we purchased for the snow melt system that will not get put into the combined heat and power plant, we can't use electric revenues to pay off the debt because that is not an electric revenue expense. So we need to, as a board, and I'm sure council has a say in this as well, we need to determine how that equipment gets paid. And then just as importantly, we need to decide who operates the snow melt system and how the operational costs are configured going forward. Now, I thought it would be appropriate because a lot of things have been said publicly about what the Board of Light and Power can and can't do with regards to snow melt. At no point in time up to this point has that memo from our attorney been made public until now. That memo, as it's discussed here at this meeting, is now public. And that memo establishes the guide rails. This is what the BLP needs to consider as it's approving or disapproving or modifying or changing what it does for snow melt. So it's there for your guidance going forward. The first question that you need to use that memo to relate to is as it results to the repayment of the bans. All right, so my understanding from talking to bond counsel and the action that you just took is that $1 million is no longer able to be financed with bans or with the bonds. Because the bans and the bonds, and for the public that doesn't understand what a ban is, it's a bond anticipation note. It's a construction loan that we took out to pay for that equipment, which we anticipate repaying that amount off with the bonds when they're issued. All right, so that's a significant portion of the repayment. The bonds will be used to repay demolition, some of the work that we've already done. However, these are electric revenue bonds, right? That means that we're dedicating electric revenues in the future towards paying off those bonds. And we will be gaining no electric revenues from that $1 million investment. In fact, it's questionable whether we should even continue to have that investment on our books, given that. So what we're going to have to do, at least initially, is we're going to have to take our cash out of the bank and pay off those bands until we get $1 million from somebody somewhere else. The only option that I have is to take the cash out of the bank, the cash reserves, and pay that $1 million. I cannot use the bonds to pay it off. All right. So that's why that amount was removed, that investment was removed in the resolution that you just passed. Okay. So now the question comes about is, can we use cash reserves to pay that $1 million? It's important that you look at the portions of the charter that control what our cash reserves say. And there are restrictions on what we can use both our revenues for and our cash reserves for. But in the cash reserves section of the charter, and this is pointed out in that memo that will be made public for those that want to see it, suggests that the cash reserves can be used for the purposes that it was set aside for. In other words, you put money in the bank for future electric investment. I don't think anybody put our cash reserves into the bank to pay for the snowmelt system. I don't think that was the intent of the monies that were put there. So if we use the monies that were put there for electric system revenue improvements, I think you're violating that provision of the charter. So if that's not the case and the board wants to look at something else, I don't know what else it is, but at this point in time, I am looking to you, the board, for direction, and to the council. It's probably going to have to be discussed, but I'm looking for you and to say, okay, where do you want me to get the $1 million to pay off the $1 million of bans? That's the first question. And I guess we need to start discussing it. From my perspective, there's some that the guide rails associated with what you can do are established by the city attorney. I have some real concerns about almost every avenue that you take in that regard, but in the, this is, and I think if you read the memo, and I think it's right, this is at the board's discretion. The board can read that opinion and use your discretion to decide how these items are paid for. But there's two questions, and I think we need to start discussing is the one question is this $1 million. The next question is operating costs for this year and following years. It has been suggested that the BLP can just take electric revenues and pay for a portion of the operating costs of the snowmelt system. I don't want to make that decision, right? If that's what the board and council direct me to do, that is more, that is your decision to make. It's not mine. So I think what I'm asking you all to do, and it has to be done relatively quickly because we are getting to the point where we need to dedicate resources to operating the snowmelt system this winter. And there's some real issues. We are no longer staffed appropriately to operate the interim system in the condition that it's at, and we can get into a detailed discussion about that, and Eric's here to talk about it. But we really don't have the staff with one 24/7 operator at Eaton Drive to go out and check on and drain the tank and do some other things that really need to be done on a regular basis for the snowmelt system. So I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do that, but I think it's really important that in the next really month and a half, you all approve of a operations plan, an operations funding plan, because right now we have no money in our budget, zero, because our anticipation is that the snow melt system would be quote self-funded, and the cost would be paid for by the city and the users of the system, not by the BLP. So we don't have any revenues dedicated. Our rates do not include any funding for the snow melt system, and our operational budget does not include any expenses for it. So we're gonna have to add something to the budget or to the revenue stream in some fashion if the board wishes to subsidize or within the guidelines that are established. So that's why that is there for. I guess from my perspective, it's appropriate to have some discussion here at the board level. And then I think Bob's here as well. He might want to talk to this, but I think the council's desire is to have, committee work on this and try to figure out how, between board and council, how these items are going to be paid for. But I think there's been an expression from some of you that maybe you want to have a discussion here at the board level before it goes to the city, before you send some people to the city council to talk about that, so that, or maybe you want to have the whole board and the whole council talk about this issue.
Okay. So you're looking for answers. I'm not sure each of our board members knows all the ins and outs that some of us will know because I've sent them. I think that you're asking us who pays $1 million, how much do each of us pay if each of us is obligated to pay. I'm not sure tonight we can give you answers.
And I think at this point in time, I'm just, I guess it's funny sometimes, you all individually call me up and say, we're not going to do that, or we're going to do this. We can't do this. Telling me that individually is really kind of meaningless. All right. I'm asking for you guys to collectively put together some sort of process because this is not really a staff issue. This is a board council issue. And quite frankly, I'm begging you all to get together, form some sort of consensus and give us direction, and time is running out. Now, I hate to say that, but this is actually something that your staff has been asking you all for answers for at least since this memo. And that's why I'm saying we raised these questions to you before we ever canceled the project, because we started thinking about what this is happening, and there was people talking in the public about what we can and can't do, and assuming things and making statements that are flat out wrong. So I think what we need to do is get these committees together and start talking and giving us direction, because I don't have the answers. When you call me up and say, well, why are we doing this? Or why are we doing that? This is clearly, if you read that memo, this is at the board's discretion. And quite frankly, the revenues and the expenses of the board are solely your responsibility. The budgets, the revenues, the rates, they are solely at your discretion. So you need to figure out how much of this stuff you're going to pay for with council, and then tell me how much you want to change the revenues and the expense budget so that I can present to you a revised budget and fund and revenue plan, rate changes that will facilitate what you want to do. But I can't do that in a vacuum. So you guys are I'm trying to nudge you as best I can, but I don't have these answers. These are really, and I know from talking to almost every one of you about this issue at some point in time individually, you all have a differing idea of what should and shouldn't be done in this regard. So tell each other, please, get together, tell each other, and then agree on a consensus. Please stop beating up on me and on my staff. This is not my issue, all right? And quite frankly, now it's very, very clear that we have been directed to not be in the snow melt business, right? That's what we've been directed to do. So your staff is saying, we're fine. We're fine getting out of the snow melt business. Tell us how to get there.
Jack? How about a motion to create this, work team that, Balchi suggested in the conclusion of his report? How about if we I know there has been a group, I don't have a preference. I mean, I'm just thinking that there are issues here that have got to be worked out. I think, in a setting other than here.
But we had a group of 4 of us, from the city and 4 from Fort Lake Power.
Right.
But I think having sat on that committee, I have some of the same thoughts that Dave has. I don't know what all of you are thinking. I think I do. And it's not a united front. We each have our own specific issues. So I think the starting point is we've got to get our act together. We've got to sit down and talk openly to each other and hammer out where we are. Then our representatives of the board have a better idea of where this board is, to find out the same information from the city. So I think the first step is for this board to meet. Each of us has to be open and say what we think, where we can find answers, and that has to be done with a couple of steps we have to attack.
We need a little time to think about it before I start talking at once.
I would also say that I don't agree that we have given you the direction that we're not to be in the snow melt business. Just because it is not part of the announced, the new, information that we're gonna give to the public doesn't mean, to me at least, that we've said that we don't want to be in that business.
I think that's why you can draw your own.
Let's just stick on the issue.
Yeah, you can.
It's part of the issue.
You can draw your own conclusions from the memo that I provided you. Right? It wasn't, I said that you told me that. That's how I read the memo that you have before you. It does not say.
Which memo?
The memo from the city attorney. That's why I gave it to you. It's pretty specific. It says what the board is chartered to do and what it's not chartered to do. Now, you can interpret that however you want, but what I was saying is that the city attorney and the charter is suggesting that you are in the electric business.
It says here, for example, BOP certainly engages in activities that incurs expenses not involving direct production of electric power.
Correct. And that is a modifier on an earlier statement that you need to read the whole memo. And I agree with you. And you know that we asked the attorney about that. And that does not apply to ongoing expenses, particularly of this nature. What he was talking about there is items like moving a pole, like we just did at Saluka Field, or paying for, a contribution towards a ball drop. It is not talking about paying $75,000, $80,000 a year towards snowmelt and $1 million of capital for the snowmelt system. That is not what he's talking about there. But I think it is entirely appropriate for this board to have the discussion that we're talking about and ask the city attorney, because you did ask him that question and he did give you the same answer that I just gave.
I would like a motion, to set a special meeting and, so we can get beyond this point. So letting each other know where we stand.
I'll make a motion.
Would it be a work session with just the board or a work session with board and council?
No, we would start with just the BOP.
Okay.
I'll make the motion to have a special meeting.
Support.
Be held at the Board of Light and Power offices.
I think we're.
I appreciate it. I think that's exactly what I'm asking for.
Let's
So,
first vote on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
okay, so should we move on from this one?
Well, I think what,
Oh, you want to pick a date?
I just have a comment. I think that we have to give the board a week or so to think about this. Otherwise, they're not going to have the time to prepare and sort out their options. So if we can do it in 8 to 14 days, I think we'd like to have it.
Jack, could we have, Renee or one of the staff, check with each of us on availability? Rather than set the date ourselves, let's have her call us. I don't know about the others, I know I'm not gonna be here 10 days from now.
Okay, the suggestion is to give us a chance to check our calendar. So we will ask the staff to call Monday. And at that point, we'll set a meeting date.
I do think, and I congratulate Larry because Larry put up with, I think we had a 4-hour discussion or something last Thursday and some of these questions were raised. There is a lot of stuff that people don't understand about our snow melt operations and what we're doing and now and how that might have changed with the combined heat and power plant and how it didn't. And I know Larry was very patient with staff and tried to went through all of these things and appreciate that. But I think it is important, particularly in this interim solution. This interim solution was not designed as a permanent solution, all right? So this idea that we can just keep doing this is not reality, all right? So there are some things that we're gonna have to do to the interim solution to make it a permanent solution. And part of that is to figure out who's gonna operate it, how they're gonna operate it, and who's gonna pay for the additional improvements to make the temporary
I
solution
think that's part of
more
what
permanent.
we're ready for,
Well,
is that discussion.
my point is that some of the, before you, as you guys are formulating your decision and thinking about this stuff, I would encourage you to, come in, talk to Eric, talk to because some of these issues are not they're not as people think they are and people have been suggesting they are in the public. And I think that's why we need to have some of these discussions more publicly because there is a real misunderstanding. And that's why I think we need to have some of these discussions because there's a real misunderstanding about what we're doing now and what we were planning on doing and how we were doing it and how we're going to share costs and all that kind of stuff. So I think it would be helpful before you guys get together and meet to get some of your questions answered, to have a discussion individually, answer your questions individually. Because if we have to do that all in a 1 hour meeting, I would hope that you can use that 1 hour meeting to kind of share your thoughts and have to give and take both and not spend a bunch of time with staff briefing you on some of these issues. I think that's good. Like I said, I think we spent a lot of time with Larry, so I appreciate that. He probably already knows more about this than he probably wants to. But I think that would be appropriate as well. So I'm making that offer. I would hope that some of you come in to have those discussions before and get your questions answered before that work study.
Okay, the motion is on the floor. Yeah, we go to the other roll call. You will hear from, you will call us on Monday. And also have a chance. Keep it short.
My question is, if you are convening prior to your next board meeting, will open, meeting rules apply as far as notifying the public to be able to listen to your discussion?
I don't believe that, this can be a full discussion, so I'm just bringing it up. Next item.
Again, I think item 5B might roll into 6A, but, what you have before you from an action item 3B is to update our strategic plan consistent with the actions that you've taken over the last month, and that would just be remove one item from the strategic plan that's noted there. So I think it's staff's, obviously this project isn't going forward. There's no way any other project is going to be completed in that project, in that timeframe. So I think, we can talk later about potentially putting something else in its place or whatever. But at this point in time, I would just like to remove, that item from the strategic plan.
Okay.
I'll make the motion.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
6A, again, I've included for you, and I would encourage, we have a few people running for the board here as well, is we spent the last year and a half, almost 2 years, talking about the one item that we just removed from our strategic plan, right? So we have an entire strategic plan. The entire thing, I went through it again today, does not make one mention of a power plant on Harbor Island with the exception of this one item, right? So we have been working as a staff diligently in all of these different areas, in all of these different ideas that, and we can go through some of it, but we do not anticipate in the next year talking about any of the stuff that you've talked about for the last year and a half, and that you focused and we formed citizen groups about, and we want to talk about forming additional committees and all this kind of stuff. None of that stuff is in our strategic plan. Now, should we add some of it to it? Sure, that's fine. But 100% of our current strategic plan, absent this item, talks about purchasing all of the power and operating a distribution system, right? That's what that strategic plan talks about. It talks about going from a power plant centric operation to a distribution centric operation. And I think everybody should, I'm giving it all to you again, and I'm encouraging people that are running for the board to read the strategic plan, because, and this is again what I talked about with Larry for quite some time, is there's a real disconnect between what we're talking about publicly and what we're planning in our strategic plan to do, all right? And I think we need to refocus when we sell debt. I mean, our debt is going to be refocused towards distribution related stuff. Our focus over the next year is not going to be on building a power plant. It's not going to be on redeveloping Harbor Island. It's going to be on the items that are in our strategic plan. The other thing that I've included again, and when we approved this document, and we didn't talk about it a lot because we used it in our strategic plan, but in January, we had an independent party come in and do a business readiness risk assessment. And one of the 21 areas that organization approved was power supply. Not one of the risks, opportunities, and considerations that they've shown in that business readiness risk assessment talks about building a power plant. Not one. So we have spent almost all of our time, almost all of our emphasis, almost all of our public communications is directed towards a very, very small portion of our diversified portfolio located locally. And now that is removed. So as a staff, as your management, what I'm hoping that we do in the next meeting, and as we enter into a new, 2 of you are going to get replaced with 2 other people. The board's actions in the next 5 years or 4 years and in 10 months is not at all related to what we've talked about in the last year and a half. And I'm hoping that by putting these things out there and redeveloping and reinitiating this strategic planning process, and if we need to change our strategic plan to address these areas in some fashion that some of the public was suggesting, I think it's appropriate that everyone gets on the same page on the board and in the community, that our strategic plan reflects the risks, opportunities, and considerations that were in the business risk assessment. And our capital plans were created to address those areas. Our budget was set to address certain areas. And as I think some people pointed out before, we have no monies set aside in our annual budget or in our capital plan to do any additional assessments on the Harbor Island facility or on any other local generation. So we are not progressing down that path. And to the extent that we want to, what needs to happen is we need to put into our strategic plan some goals and objectives that address those issues and then direct staff to do that. But I think at this point in time, staff is directed by that plan and those documents. And if we're going this direction and everybody else is going that direction, I think it's appropriate that we refocus. So that's why I've given you both of those documents again. I would reread them again if I was wanting to get on the board. Those are the issues, whether you think that we should or shouldn't do that stuff, then those are the things that you should be campaigning on. Not talking about a pause or construction or a new assessment or anything like that, because that's not what we're planning on doing. So I think that's why we've given it to you. Hopefully, we'll refocus on that document, and to the extent it changes, that's fine. Staff is here to facilitate the changes and modifications as the board desires.
Okay. I'll go to item B.
Item B, and I have just a couple other notes here. Item B is the 125th anniversary, September 29. I think there'll be a press release going out. It's a significant. There's not a lot of municipal electric utilities, just for my mind. A lot of them were formed in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They're all starting to celebrate their 125th anniversary, but it's a significant event. And I think what we wanted to do is recognize it. We don't have a big celebration plan, other than just, tent and maybe some refreshments, and, maybe the chair and myself can say a few words, but I think it's just an element of the board recognizing the accomplishment and then celebrating with the community. And more information will come out on exactly what's happening, but essentially 5 to 7, we're just going to have an event in our parking lot, invite the public in for, I think we have a taco. There are hot dogs now? I think we're going to have hot dogs and popcorn or something. That's not but anyway, I would encourage you all to put that on your calendar and to come. The other thing I did want to note, again, I included in your packet, there's a lot going on nationally. And I think some of the public here has shown a lot of interest in, renewable energy and development. To the extent that we're not going to be doing that a lot, other people are going to be doing it. It will be driven by the stuff that's happening in Washington right now. And I included in the board's packet, I sit on the board of directors of the APPA, the American Public Power Association. And our CEO there wrote a letter to the House committee chairs putting together the energy portion of that $3.5 trillion package of spending. And personal comment is, this is not how good public policy is made, and it surely isn't how good public policy is made in the electric business. We're trying to cram through in a 2-week or 3-week period some of the most significant revisions to the electric utility industry that I've seen in my 30 years that I've been here. And it's not going to impact us to the extent that it would have impacted us 6 months ago, because we are really not in the generation business, but it will impact us such that some of the penalties that they're talking about associated with sale of energy and collecting dollars from our customers, this will have substantial impacts on the rates that we charge. All right. And the aggressive timeframes that people are talking about, whether you're pro moving in this direction or against it, I am 100% in favor of transitioning our industry to a more renewable future. But the aggressive timetable that we're talking about in Washington, D.C. right now, and this is what the letter suggests as well, is building this amount of transmission and this amount of generation in the timeframes that they're talking about, particularly renewable energy, that takes huge amounts of land and huge amounts of work and planning. There is absolutely no way, absolutely none, that anybody in the industry would suggest that we can do it in the timeframes that are being suggested in Washington, D.C. right now. So if you're concerned about these types of elements, it behooves all of you not to come to the BLP, because you know what? We are not, we are nothing in this grand scheme of things, but we will be paying for this development that's occurring. And there is absolutely no way that we can meet these goals that are being set without being quote penalized. And they're talking about penalties for those that don't, and those penalties get passed on to our customers. All right. So I think, and if they want to say that that's not a tax increase, that's a tax increase. All right. So I don't want to get into a political battle on what's right and what's wrong, how fast or how, but what's being proposed in a very, very short time frame. And that's the issue that I think APPA is in a unique position of having municipalities on both sides that are on both sides of the aisle. I think her letter is pretty well written to suggest it's not that we oppose implementation of renewable energy or new transmission or anything else that's being proposed, but in the timeframes that they're proposing it and in the manner that they're proposing it right now in DC is a really, I mean, it's not even a bad idea. It's just undoable. So I think that's why that letter is included. If anybody else wants to see the letter, it's good, but I'd be happy to provide it. That was provided just for information, so I wanted to point to it. The other thing that I did, the idea of the public talking about the air permit, I did want to point out that the Eagle does have a scheduled hearing on the 22nd at 6 p.m. At this point in time, it's noticed. I think if the BLP revokes our air permit at this point in time, they're probably still going to have the hearing. All right. So, and if you wait till next month, they're really going to have the hearing. But I think what is interesting to note, and there's some things being said again publicly in editorials in the paper that are simple. There is no tax dollars, first of all, being wasted or any effort on our behalf to let this either go forward or stop. Some of what is being said is just absolutely nonsense about the air permit and what it means to the BLP and what it doesn't mean and what we're trying to do and whether we're trying to pull a fast one or anything like that. That's absolutely wrong. I'm more than happy to do it, but at this point in time, they're going to have the public hearing. And I think the idea behind the public hearing is for people to voice their opinion if they want to. They don't want to, they don't have to. But it is interesting, if you look at the fact sheets, of that are attached to the public hearing document. Eagle's already played their parts. Read the information. I mean, if you're worried about them making a position and wasting their time, they've already decided this air permit is going to get issued. So stopping the air permit at this point in time is all, I mean, what Eagle is doing here is they've said, we're going to approve the permit. It meets all of our air requirements. All of them. This project is not a boondoggle. It's not an air emissions fiasco. It's not anything else. I mean, I'm not arguing for it anymore. I'm just saying that the process that they're in is they have completed all of their work. They've completed it all. There is nothing that us pulling the air permit is going to prevent them from doing. In fact, they're probably still going to go forward with this hearing on September 22, and they're going to complete the process. And from my perspective, this is my perspective, and we can talk about it at the next meeting of whether we want to revoke the air permit and pull the air permit that we're going to get. I mean, we're going to get it. All right. We've paid for it. We're going to get it. All right. That's reality. Now, if we don't want to use it, that's your decision as a board. You don't have to use it, but it's going to expire on its own weight in 18 months if we don't extend it. And again, people that don't know anything about this process are really saying some really, really dumb things. And I just want, I don't, and by the way, maybe I'm on my soapbox a bit, but this is something that literally, I mean, you looked at our staff is getting beat up for doing what we're doing. If we want to pull the air permit, you can pull the air permit, but it isn't going to change one thing, and it isn't going to cost the city or the state any money, and it happens all the time. There are all kinds of air permits that are issued by the state that never get utilized. So again, we'll talk about it next month, but in all likelihood, what we'll be talking about next month is basically denying a permit that's granted to us. And that's really what we're talking about. So I think that's just all I wanted to say about that. I
think
do.
we know where you stand.
Okay. So that's all I have. That's
Anything further from the board? Motion to adjourn is in order. Support?
Support.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourn.